Hi everyone. Hi. Is anyone's there? Say hello. Hi. So I think a few of you are watching now. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the comments below. But just for context, my name's Abby. I work for Elite IB Tutors as Client and Operations Manager, and I myself also took the IB, so I graduated in 2012. I did higher level biology, chemistry and French B, and standard level maths, English literature and psychology. And I then took a gap year and went on to study at Cambridge. I studied natural sciences. I graduated last year and then I started this job. So I'm here ready to give some last minute advice on anything you want to know about the IB and the exams, which will be starting very shortly. So this is really your opportunity to ask me anything you want about how to approach the exams, specific subjects, exam techniques, maybe what I was most fearful of in the exams and how I tackled that, anything you want. So feel free to start commenting below. Okay. So I guess we could start by talking about maybe some common thoughts and feelings at this point in the IB, because I know that for some of you, you'll be starting your exams in only about 2 days, and for most of you, your exams start in about a week. So obviously that's really quite soon now. And the best thing I would say is at this point, there is no real way of cramming 2 years worth of work into a few days, so don't try to do that. Rest assured that you have done work over the course of the 2 years. Even if you don't think you've done enough, you will be surprised by how much you've done and how much you've accomplished with that. So really now is the time to target your revision to those particular aspects of a certain subject that really you feel you need to work on. We've got our first question. So hi Bernie, how should we organise between exams to study? This is a really good question because as you know with the IB, you have a lot of exams spread over a couple of weeks, and it might be that you have a nice gap between sets of exams, but it might be that it's quite relentless and you have an exam every day for a few days. So what I would say is that the night before, obviously do focus on the exam that you have the next day and just do that subject, because that will put your mind at ease and get you in the right frame of mind to tackle that particular subject. But otherwise, what I would say is you need to think about what can and can't be accomplished within those days. So I know that for some students, you'll have a gap of maybe 4 or 5 days between, I believe it's maths and English, and then say biology and chemistry if you do those exams. So that's a really good opportunity to just refresh specific aspects of the syllabus and do some final past paper questions that you hadn't covered already, or revisiting areas of particular difficulty, because what you don't want to be doing is thinking, okay, I have 4 days to learn 2 full syllabi for very content heavy subjects. I guess the best thing you can do at this point would be to if you feel you still have time in your revision, to maybe get some flashcards ready or mind maps, things that you can look over briefly if you only have one night between one exam and the next exam, because you don't want to be looking through a folder this big of notes when you have to do an exam the next day. As for NYP e-assessments, that is something that I perhaps am not best placed to advise on, because I myself didn't do those, and the focus of this session really is more on the DP exams, so the diploma exams. But I'd encourage you to email us, so email eliteib at contact@eliteib.co.uk, and we'd be more than happy to give further advice there. It's just that this session really is targeting the IBDP final exams. So I'm sorry I can't be of more help there, but we would be very happy to offer you some further assistance and advice there. So just going back to your question, Bernie, I think, so what aspects of biology HL should we focus more on? Now, from what I've encountered in my time tutoring and now in my time in this role, there are a few key areas of recurrent difficulty. So one of them would be, I think, physiology always poses a challenge because it is such a big topic that there's bound to be something within it that you struggle with. So I think for a lot of people at a higher level that would be the kidney. I know that was the part that I found the hardest. So that might be something worth focusing on, and because physiology is such a big topic, you can guarantee that it will come up somewhere in the paper, and there may well be an extended response question on it as an example. Beyond that, genetics tends to be quite tricky for a lot of people, so maybe the dihybrid crosses as an example, so Punnett grids, but when it gets a bit more complex, and the more kind of methodical aspects of the course. So certain parts of biology you can kind of memorise explanations, but where you actually have to work out, for example, what alleles will be inherited in the offspring, that's where it gets a bit trickier. So I would maybe look over as many past paper questions as you can on genetics as well. And then anything related to biochemistry, a lot of people tend to struggle with. So I know that respiration and photosynthesis are two of the most common areas of difficulty because they are very technical. There are lots of individual steps to remember, and they could well come up as an 8 or 9 mark question because there is so much detail to say, for example, about even if you just take a part of a particular reaction, so the electron transport chain, there's so much you can say about that alone. So I think having kind of pre-prepared plans of what you could say about those more complex topics if they came up in an 8 mark question is a really good technique. I know that by this point in my revision I was basically learning mark schemes, so learning exactly what the mark schemes say, the orders of the points they give, particular terminology, because sometimes you get the mark just for saying a particular word. But really everyone will have their own areas of difficulty, so something that you may think is fine another person will really struggle with. And the best way to establish that is to still, at this stage, do as many past paper questions as you can, even if it's just quickly doing a paper 1, because that is a very good overview of where your knowledge may still be lacking. So I hope that helps, but let me know if you want any further clarification there. Do we have... Yes, I would definitely recommend going over exams and mark schemes from other years. One thing to be cautious about is that your syllabus is quite new. So it started in May 2016. That was when the first exams for this syllabus took place. So you have May 2016, November 2016, May 2017, November 2017. Those 4 sets of papers are completely relevant to your current syllabus. So if you can find those online, and they are accessible online, or your teachers can give you access to them, then do have a look at them and do look over the mark schemes, because they're really helpful in terms of how you word your answers. As a word of caution, any past papers before May 2016 will still be relevant, but not quite as relevant because the syllabus has changed. So I'd say about 80 to 90% of the content is the same, it's just organised in a different way. So just make sure if you're doing any old papers, you have your syllabus to hand so you can check what you do and don't need to know. Hi Marina, so you say, I read that you went to Cambridge. How often do they still accept people who do not make their offers? I did indeed go to Cambridge. I was, I suppose, in a little bit of a different situation because I applied in my gap year. So I applied once I already had my grade, which was a big reassurance for me because I didn't have to worry about all of that during the IB, and I didn't have to worry about a conditional offer I had to meet. But obviously most people do apply in the IB, so that's absolutely fine. In terms of not accepting people who don't make their offers, I can't really give a definitive answer as to how often this happens or not. I do know of a number of people who have missed their offer by 1 point, for example, especially if it's in a standard level subject or if it's one of the 3 bonus points. Cambridge offers are obviously quite tough, and they're making you an offer of 42 or 43, which isn't an uncommon offer. That gives you a very small margin of error. So I think this varies a lot from college to college, but they do understand that people will, on the day, sometimes just fail to perform in an exam as they'd hoped. And of course, because all of your exams are at the end, that is a lot of pressure on this one particular time in your education. So they are aware of that. I would say the frustrating thing as an IB student is that you get your results much earlier than A-level students. So you get yours on the 6th of July, and A-level students don't get theirs until mid to late August. So what this does mean is that sometimes, say if you miss your offer by 1 or 2 points, it doesn't tend to be the case that Cambridge will reject you outright. It will be more that they'll say that you have to wait until the A-level results come out, and then they'll see how many people have met their offers there and see whether they can take you based on whether A-level people have or haven't met their offer. So it can be quite an agonising wait, and I feel a lot of sympathy for anyone who has to go through that, because that must be a particularly unpleasant summer. But if it's just 1 point, and if you've otherwise performed strongly, especially in your higher levels, they are likely to be somewhat lenient and understanding. But if you're in any doubt, the best thing to do is to contact the admissions office at the individual college to which you've applied, where you hold an offer, either at the stage where, and we hope it doesn't happen, but at the stage where you don't get your offer, or even now, if you just want some peace of mind, just asking them what the general protocol is for those who don't miss their offer. But I would say it isn't the case that all hope is lost if you do happen to miss your offer. Okay. Any more questions? Tips to keep relaxed during the exams. So I think everyone has their own way to approach this. I know that the way I do it now would probably be quite different to the way I did it when I did the IB. So I remember if I'd done an exam, if I didn't have an exam the next day, I would probably just go home and watch TV and maybe have some nice food and do things that make you feel good generally. A lot of people find exercise very helpful. That's probably something I would do more now than I did in the IB, like just going for a run or going to the gym after you've done an exam, just to kind of put it out of your mind. And I would say in terms of keeping relaxed, do talk to friends, but maybe don't talk to friends who've been doing the same exam as you at the same time, because you don't want it to be the case where you come out of the exam and all you talk about is that exam and comparing answers. So maybe go and try to find a friend who does completely different subjects, maybe who doesn't even do the IB, and have a conversation with them to try to take your mind off things. Really, it's perfectly fine if you have, especially if you have a number of days between exams. But even if you don't, just to take a bit of time to yourself, doing nothing of value, maybe just have a bath, watch your favourite TV programme, browse the internet mindlessly, whatever it may be. You've been working very intensely, so it's your time to switch off. And I remember in my Cambridge exams, for example, which weren't dissimilar to the IB in that there were a lot of them and they were long, and they were on consecutive days. I would just meet up with friends for lunch as much as I could, just little things like that make your day a bit more pleasant. What tips would you say that helped? Hi Lilith, I'll get to you in a moment. What tips would you say that helped you at Maths SL, especially in paper 2? Tips that helped me, honestly, the biggest thing I can say, and the only thing you can do really, is do every single past paper question you can find. So by the time I'd done the exams, I'd done every past paper, and I'd done some of them a couple of times, just because maths is such a practical, systematic subject. all you can do is practice. Your textbook is useful, and any online videos you find are useful in terms of explaining the theory underlying a particular approach, but really all you can do is just try to put that knowledge into practice. So try to find as many different questions as you can on a particular topic. IB question banks are very good for that, for targeting a revision to a particular area. Seeing if they can take the same problem and phrase it in different ways, because often they'll give you some context to it. So in terms of things like optimization, in differentiation, that's a particular application of the same skill which you use in other questions. So yeah, really just doing every single past paper question and making sure that you're on top of your calculator usage. So maybe having even just having a list of things on your wall of ways to do different the buttons you press to accomplish a particular function on your calculator, because for so many people that will be their downfall if you're not completely familiar with your calculator and how you can use it to the best of your ability, because it will do so much for you if you just tell it what to do in the correct way. And there are some excellent calculator tutorials on YouTube as well, so you may find those really helpful. Tutorials that are geared towards your particular model as well, because obviously some people use Casio, some use Texas Instruments, and you'll have different individual models. And do ask your teacher at this stage if you want them to show you a particular approach to a question on your calculator. So on to Lilith's question. I'm a future UWC student, but my English is not that good. Would it be hard for me to study there? So I would say I myself haven't been to a UWC school, but they are incredibly international, and so many people will be coming from a background where English isn't their first language. I would say language skills are, of course, important in that you will be using, if you're taking the IB in English, you'll be doing all of your subjects except your other language in English. So it is something that's worth working on before you begin the IB, but it's certainly not impossible, and I do know of a number of people who have undertaken the IB when they're still developing their competency in English. So I think it's certainly something that you can do. Maybe now is the time to look into some options for extra support, whether that may be tutoring or some resources that you might find useful. Do email us if you want any additional assistance there, because we are familiar with supporting students whose first language isn't English in taking the IB, so that's certainly something we can advise on further. Hi Peter, resources for econ high-level students. You're very welcome, Lilith. So resources for econ high-level. I myself haven't taken economics, so unfortunately I can't give specific advice there, but that is something that other tutors of ours will be able to advise on. I would say hopefully you have a good textbook that you're comfortable with, but maybe now is the time, if your school has any other, if your school library has any other textbooks that you haven't yet looked at, maybe look at a few different ones, because sometimes a particular textbook doesn't suit a particular student. And then I know for group 3 subjects, I can only really speak for psychology because that's what I did, but there are so many great resources on YouTube, just small educational videos that will explain a particular learning outcome in the syllabus, that will go into more depth than you would find in your textbook, that will go through a particular case study. In economics, obviously, there is the mathematical component and the graphical component, so they're likely to go through those step by step and break them down a bit more. But again, if you want any more specific advice than that, I would recommend emailing us, and then we can see what we can do, because unfortunately I can't off the top of my head give economics advice. I don't have a background in that subject. But I am sure from having looked into from my experience of other subjects, that there will be plenty of economics resources out there if you just type in IB economics resources. Okay, hi Ellie. How to make sure you'll get a good mark on TOK extended essay, since you're told the marking is so subjective, which unfortunately, yes, it is. It is very frustrating. Obviously, it depends on the individual essay, but any tips on refining language in a way that suits, so I'll just have to expand that, suits examiners. Good question, yeah. And I think this is also, this question about language is relevant to any subject you do, and is relevant for those of you taking the final, about to take the final exams, as it is relevant for you in the case of TOK and the extended essay. So I would say, especially for the extended essay, having the marking criteria at hand. So those are available online, and your teacher should also be able to give you a copy. And online, you should also be able to find marking criteria that are more specific to the subject of interest. So you'll see teachers have often produced marking criteria that are outlined. So it's the general marking criterion, but they'll explain them in the context of, for example, an English extended essay or a biology extended essay. So really making sure that you can go through and tick off those points as best you can, and checking that through with your supervisor on regular occasions. Obviously there is a limit to how much support you can receive from them, but it's perfectly fine to say to them, do you feel I'm hitting that criterion correctly? Do you think there's anything else I can do here to improve that? For the extended essay, the research question is key, because if you don't have that right, and if it's not as specific as it needs to be, that can really hinder the whole of the rest of your essay, because if it's too broad, you're not going to be able to go into sufficient depth about the topic that you're exploring. So the more specific, the better there. And you'd be amazed how it's not easy to write 4,000 words on a topic, but even on a very specific topic, you can get such a lot of material out of it because you're going into real depth. With TOK, again, the marking is very subjective, as you say. Do be careful about the selection of your question. Make sure it's something where you feel you can talk sufficiently about the examples you use, and that you're comfortable with the areas of knowledge and the ways of knowing that you're going to incorporate. I would say it's better, again, to be quite specific in TOK. So don't worry about trying to include every single area of knowledge or every single way of knowing. Pick a couple of good ones that you can really go into depth, and have an example that you can use in one part of your essay, and then bring in again for another part of your essay, maybe for the counter argument. And again, it's terminology. It's really making sure that you're looking through the TOK syllabus and seeing that you're using those terms correctly. And you don't get marks just for using the terms, but you do get marks for using them in a relevant context. They really like when you bring in your own experience. So TOK is a bit of a weird one, because it's not, it is kind of philosophical, but it's not based on philosophical theory. Instead, it's kind of you using your own experiences, of your own learning experiences, to reflect on the nature of knowledge. So they like it when you refer to what you've learned either in your particular IB subjects or in life more generally through, for example, cultural experiences you've had, your experience of living in a particular country, of being in a particular environment. And they like when you make reference to yourself as a knower. That's a really good piece of language to use. But yeah, the best guidance is to use the language as it is in the syllabus and use it in a meaningful way, and to be careful in both cases about which question you pick. Obviously, picking the right one of the choice in TOK, and formulating your question very carefully in the extended essay. Okay, so and then again, we can provide more advice on both of those if you're seeking any more advice on another occasion. This session is geared more towards the final exams, but we'd be more than happy to advise further and to offer individual support if that's what you're seeking. Hi again, Bernie. So you said, as I take ESS, I'm not sure if I should take the ecology option for biology paper 3 or keep with human physiology. I myself did the human physiology option back in the day when you had to do 2 options. So I did that and the neurobiology option. I don't have as much experience with the ecology option. I would say there is a reasonable amount of overlap. So it's quite a nice way of saving yourself some time. But if you've learnt human physiology in the lesson, which it seems to suggest you have from your question, I would say stick with that at this point, unless you think it's awful and you think there's no way you can tackle a question on it, which I promise you can. I would say it's risky to learn a whole new option at this stage, because even though biology is one of the later exams, you obviously have other exams to do in the meantime. And the advantage of doing human physiology as an option is it does reinforce your knowledge of physiology from topics 6 and 11. And I remember it being quite an interesting option, so hopefully you like it too. But yeah, I would say probably stick with what you've learned at this point. So then we move on to IHAM. Hi IHAM, or AHAM, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. What do you do to get that motivation to study? Because I'm really tired and I don't have the motivation or drive to study more, and externals are coming up in a few days. I'm sorry to hear that. You're welcome, Bernie. I know that feeling. I think we've all been there, and you will get through it. When you say externals, I'm presuming you mean the final exams. In which case, one key thing to look forward to is the fact that in under a month they'll be over. So if you do French, they'll be over on they'll be over on the 18th of May. And most people will finish before that. So that is really soon. So I would say that in itself should hopefully get you through, because you have a nice long summer to look forward to. But other than that, motivation to study is always a difficult one. And I know I remember struggling with this in my time at university, because it can feel as if there's so much to revise and just not enough time in which to do it. So I would say reward yourself for the little things, like, you know, if you've covered a particularly difficult topic that you'd been putting off, treat yourself to a nice snack, or maybe half an hour of TV, or just those little things that you tend to deny yourself at this time when you're revising. Other than that, one of the best ways for me to feel as if I was making progress without feeling overwhelmed by the amount of work I was doing was the Pomodoro method, which is a technique where you do 25 minutes of work and then have a 5-minute break, and then after every 4 Pomodoros or so, you're welcome, Ali, after every 4 Pomodoros or so you take a longer break. So you can change the settings, but generally it works on a 25-minute, 5-minute basis. And that's a really good way of having quite short bursts of work, because for many people, myself included, it's difficult to sustain that level of concentration and therefore motivation long term, or over a period of hours. I know that I used to try to work for hours and hours, so maybe 3 hours in one go without a break at all. And that may be fine when you're really immersed in a task, but actually in terms of knowledge retention, it's not the most effective way to do it. But doing those Pomodoros was a really easy way for me to see that I was accomplishing something, because I used to keep a sticker chart of all the Pomodoros I'd done in a day, and I could see that in a day, if I'd done 10, that was quite a significant amount of revision. So I felt quite proud and motivated there. And I think part of the motivation will also come from just ticking the exams off as you go along. And knowing that you only have to deal with that particular subject for another few days, and then maybe you'll never have to look at it again. Okay, hopefully that helps. But yeah, motivation is always a tricky one. I think it's just, at this point, a matter of remembering that the end is very much in sight. Annie, for notes, did you totally rewrite them anew for revision, or condense them? Or, sorry, there's a phone call coming through, I'll just reject that. Or focus most of your attention on past papers? This is a really good question. I probably did more of the latter, so I focused most of my attention on past papers, especially for chemistry and maths, because my reasoning there was that they are so systematic, they rely so much on knowledge application, that I could memorize the textbooks, but that wouldn't mean I'd be able to put that knowledge into practice, especially for calculations. So I just did loads and loads and loads of past papers, and then I went back and wrote notes based on where I hadn't done so well in the past papers, so it was almost doing it the opposite way. But when I started revising, I basically did past papers first, and then used those to target my revision after that. I would say also you'll hopefully have some notes from if you've been set tests for individual topics, and those are often good notes. You might want to condense them a little bit for the final exams, but do make use of notes you've already made. And I would say at this stage, although the process of note making can be helpful, I wouldn't, in terms of revision, you don't really have the time to make all of the notes and then revise all of the notes. So you do have to be quite tactical now, and that's why past papers are so good. That said, I would recommend writing condensed revision notes for Group 3 subjects. So for psychology, all of my revision notes were effectively plans for SAQs, short answer questions, or long answer questions, LAQs. So by the time when I was revising in the day or so before the exam, I was just able to flip through my notes and see that there was a one-page plan for one learning outcome, there was a one-page plan for another learning outcome. Not going into a huge amount of detail about every theory or every study, but just enough that I could refresh my knowledge, and then if there was a significant knowledge gap, I would refer to my textbook or my class notes. But yeah, I would say there is the temptation of spending ages of time making revision notes at this point, and then realising that you're just finishing the notes before doing the exam. So that's why I think if you're going to make revision notes for anything, they need to be condensed, they need to be kind of skeletal plans. Same goes for English, really, for paper 2. Or maybe flashcards, which are very quick to produce, or indeed mind maps, because mind maps, again, are very quick to make, that they look quite nice, and then you may find that when you see the relevant question in the exam, you can, if it's an essay, for example, you can then redraw that mind map from memory, and that often helps to get you thinking. I used mind maps to plan my essays as well as just to revise. So yeah, I would say at this stage, either very targeted condensed notes, or for the systematic subjects, just go straight in with past papers and do as many of them as you can, and refer back to your textbook as necessary. Okay, so at this point, I also just wanted to say, please do share or comment if you're finding this helpful, in case any of your friends might benefit from it as well. We want to get as many people involved as possible, and I think one of the great things about the IB as a community is that we can all share tips and help each other out, as cheesy as it sounds. So yeah, do share and comment if you're liking what you see here. Great. So, any further questions at this point? Otherwise, I'm also happy to just talk about how I approach my exams, in case that's relevant for any of the individual subjects. How I was feeling at this time. For me, it was 6 years ago now, but I can still kind of remember being in that situation, because I think when you do look at your exam timetable, you're struck by just the sheer number of exams you have to take, and suddenly, if I compared myself to the other people at my school who were doing A-levels, they had to do maybe 3 or 4 exams every few months, and that was that. Obviously A-levels have changed since, but it is a very big difference, and that's why people say that the IB is a marathon rather than a sprint, because it has all kind of been building up to this point. But keeping your cool now in the final days and weeks before those exams is the best thing you can do. So, any other questions about anything to do with IB exams? Sometimes people wonder what the scariest exam might be. Do I think cramming is a good idea? Good question. I am in two minds about this because some people can cram very well, and in that case it does work for them, but I wouldn't say it's a reliable technique. So I would say in the IB I didn't cram, and then at university I kind of had to, because in my first year of university, effectively with natural sciences you end up doing 4 subjects, so there was a huge amount of content. It was a bit like doing 4 degrees at once. So I found that I didn't work so well under pressure when it came to revision. So I can write coursework well under pressure, like the night before, but I struggle to commit things to memory under pressure. I don't find that's the ideal way that my brain works. And so I think if you've crammed before and you've done so successfully, then why not? You might as well try. But at this point, hopefully you don't need to cram hugely. So there are little things you can cram, like definitions, which are an easy way of getting a mark or two in the sciences, or you might want to learn some quotes for English last minute, or maybe some vocabulary for your language B. But you can't cram a whole syllabus. There will be some people with exceptional minds who can, but for most of us, we have to rely on the fact that we have been working throughout the 2 years. So I would say you can cram the kind of extra little details, the sort of cherry on top, but the core knowledge, I don't think it's a good idea to cram. And often it can stress you out more than it's worth. So there is the temptation to look at your textbook and think, right, I've got to learn that whole textbook tonight, which hopefully you don't have to do. But that isn't going to put you in the best frame of mind to do your exams, whereas sometimes leaving revision at a certain point, getting a good night's sleep, getting yourself relaxed before the exam is exactly what you need to do to get yourself ready. So if you want to cram, have it in the form of flashcards or just written on one page. You can very quickly look through the night before and even the morning before, but don't rely on it as a way of learning whole topics, because it's too risky an idea, really, especially with something content heavy like the higher level sciences. And I don't think you can really cram something like maths where it is systematic and you need to know how to approach the questions beforehand. So I'd say cramming isn't a good idea overall. It can be a good idea for very specific aspects. Anything else at all? Okay, hi again. So I'm kind of a scientific person, so science is less of a problem for me, but English is a nightmare. I take English A-Lit, by the way, so what do you think is the best method for English revision? I can empathise with this, because for me, and this sounds weird, but I think English literature standard level was probably I found it my hardest subject in a way, because I knew how to do the sciences and maths, and I knew how to memorise a lot of psychology, and I was quite naturally good at French, but English was that one that got me, and the one where I was most unsure about what grade I'd get. One of the best things you can do is familiarising yourself with past questions for paper 2, so the paper based on your set texts, and having plans in mind for key themes and key ideas within the work. So your teachers presumably chose your texts for a reason, that they're probably united by certain themes or certain cultures, certain times in history. And so maybe just having mind maps for each text about the key ideas, symbolism, imagery. Obviously it will depend on what type of text you look at. I looked at plays, so there was a lot of focus on scenery and lighting as well, and depiction of the characters. But just knowing those key things that you can always talk about in a question, it gives you some structure for your revision. Knowing literary terms is helpful. Obviously, don't just throw them in without giving any thought to why they're being used, but even just using terms like syntax or metaphor, imagery, symbolism, they just add a certain something to your answer. As for paper 1, obviously it is scary because you won't have seen the text before, but again, looking through as many past papers as you can and getting a feel for whether you prefer the prose or the poetry. A lot of people tend to prefer the poetry because they find it's just easier to pick out things to say, like talking about the rhyming, the meter. But writing essay plans for as many of those paper one extracts as you can is a good idea, because at this stage you don't really have time to be just writing full essays. Structure is one of the most important things for either paper and indeed for any essay-based subject. So a significant portion of the marks you get for writing an essay are for structuring it well and for using good vocabulary and arguing your point. So having a viewpoint, saying this text is about this, or these two texts are similar in this way but different in this way. Having that point and arguing that from the outset, and learning to kind of state your conclusion in the introduction, which is called a thesis statement. That's one of the most valuable skills you can learn. That's really what makes your essay more sophisticated and takes it from an essay that you'd write before the IB to one that you'd write at the end of the IB or at university level, where you're showing that you've thought through your argument, you've planned it, you've reached a conclusion, you're kind of giving a clue to that conclusion in the introduction because you've planned it all already, and then you explore that conclusion and kind of unravel it as you go along. So you're saying, I think this, and then your essay is basically a defence of why you think that. So I think working on structure and knowing how you would structure an essay, and there are so many good resources on the internet about ways to structure English essays, acronyms that you can use to plan different paragraphs. I think that is really helpful, and just having a resource like that, even if it's just a very systematic, methodical approach. So when you come to write the essay, you can think, I've ticked off this, I've ticked off this, I've talked about this, this and this. And remembering that you don't just have to write loads and loads. You want to use your time carefully and spend a significant amount of time planning. So if the exam's an hour and a half, you might even end up spending half an hour planning and then the rest writing. Don't focus on having the longest essay possible. Focus on having a good argument. And then back to paper 2, learning quotes of no more than about 4 words and versatile quotes that you can use in a whole range of different contexts. Obviously for some poetry you might have to learn slightly longer quotes, but for novels and plays, the general advice I've seen is learning short quotes that can be used again and again and again that really capture the key themes. So yeah, I completely empathise with you there. English, I think a lot of people is the one where they think, oh, I can just kind of coast through this, but I get it, I get how you feel. It is scary. I think for me it was always the ambiguity, the fact that with the sciences I knew there was a right answer that I could reach, but with English I could just be faced with a question or an extract that I had no idea about. But stay calm, work on the structure of your essay, because that will help you in any essay-based subject, and learn short, versatile quotes would be the best advice. Okay. Any other questions about anything at all? Even if it's just things like the actual experience of taking the IB exams, because it's quite a scary process, I know. Or about life after the IB, or whatever you want to know. And yeah, I can obviously also provide slightly more specific advice. You're very welcome. Yeah, structure I think is always, that's one of the biggest pieces of advice I'd give to any IB student, because you'll have to do at least a couple of essay-based subjects in whichever IB subjects you take. Yeah, I think there is something interesting to be said for the difference between an English essay and my other essay-based subject was psychology. So a psychology essay I found much more straightforward to write because I was writing it based on studies, and I had an argument that I knew I could make based on these studies, whereas with English you are really formulating the argument yourself, which is quite a scary prospect. But have an opinion, even if you don't fully agree with that opinion. If you can have an approach and have an argument to make, that indicates to the examiner that you at least seem to know what you're talking about, even if you don't think you do. There's something to be said for writing with conviction and with confidence. Okay. Any other questions at all? How was results day? I remember being really, really nervous because I'd put a lot of pressure on myself to do well. Even though I didn't have an offer to meet at the time because I hadn't applied to university, I really wanted to get 45 points, and I did work very hard for it. So I knew it was absolutely what I had my heart set on. But I just thought, because I'm also awful for doubting myself, I thought that I'd messed up every subject in some way, and I thought I was going to be disappointed. And then I had to go to school to get my results, and my dad basically had to drag me there because I said I didn't want to go because I didn't want to know my results because I was too scared. I probably react more extremely than most, I should clarify. And then I refused to open the results initially, and then my teacher just told me, and then I think I cried because I was so happy. But yeah, it was a really weird day. There's something of a kind of that when you get your results, or even you'll find this when you finish IB exams as well, you won't really know what to do with yourself because the IB has been so much a part of your life for so long that you can't really imagine life without it. And I guess in a way it's never left me, because in my gap year I started tutoring the IB, and then I ended up in a full-time job related to the IB, so it's kind of always been in my life. But you'll feel almost a certain kind of, you'll almost feel a bit lost that you don't have to worry about the IB anymore. And if results day doesn't go exactly as you'd planned, it's still a massive achievement having got through the IB full stop. Remember, retakes are a possibility. Hopefully it's not something that you'll be thinking about at this point, but if the situation does arise where you need to think about them, then your school should be able to advise you. We can advise you on that. And remember also, so the difference between one grade and another in the IB can be so small, especially with things like TOK and the extended essay, where the marking is so variable. So don't beat yourself up for having gotten a grade lower than you'd hoped for, because sometimes it could just be one mark on a paper, or one examiner that doesn't like your style of writing as much. But it's still, however you do, you will have gotten through the IB. That is a big achievement in itself. Right. Okay. Also, one of the good things about IB results day, I mentioned this earlier, but it happens so early in the summer. So A-level students have spent the whole summer worrying about their results, whereas by the time you've got your results, you've still probably got a good couple of months before you have to think about university if you're starting this year. So that gives you a really nice long time just to have some fun. Right, well, we only have, we've technically gone over time, but if anyone has any final questions or anything they'd like to say, now is the time to let me know. Yeah, so you say that's the thing that worries me, because I feel like IB mark is really subjective because the amount of essays they correct. Interesting story, by the way. Thank you. Yes, you're right that it is subjective, but they do, I would say, they do have measures in place so particularly with subjects like English and history, the marking criteria are quite clear, and there is always with subjects like that an element of subjectivity, but they will try to use the marking criteria in quite a standardised way. But then in terms of theory of knowledge and the extended essay, those are the ones that are a bit more hit and miss, just because I think, especially with theory of knowledge, it is often a matter of your own personal interpretation of it. But I do know people who have requested remarks. So one of my friends got remarked in his TOK from a D to a B. So if you and your teacher feel you have been unfairly marked there is a possibility of looking into that and getting that remarked if possible. So at this point I would say don't worry too much about the subjectivity, because everyone will be in the same position. And then equally you have subjects like the sciences and maths where they're not really subjective, so that's quite a nice reassurance to have. And you will often find that the subjectivity can work in your favour and they can be a bit more generous than you would expect. Often your teachers will mark an essay harshly because they don't want you to get complacent or to think that an exam's going to be easy, and then you'll find that the examiners, because they know you're under exam conditions and it is a very stressful situation, they'll be a bit more generous in their marking. So often that subjectivity can work in your favour too. But yeah, everyone's in the same position, so don't worry about it hugely. Okay, so unless there are any final questions, that's probably a good point for me to round up. So again, if you liked this, do share it with your friends and let them know about us. We are available for any last minute support you might need. We can offer online tuition and face-to-face in central London and in Geneva. You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Yeah, you can always email us or call us if you have any further questions. But on behalf of the Elite IB team, I'd like to wish you the best of luck in your forthcoming exams. I'm sure you'll do great and they'll be over soon, and then I hope you have a very nice summer after that. Thank you very much for watching. Bye!